Law enforcement agencies have the unenviable job of taking criminals off the streets and putting an end to the negative effect they have on society, often without much success. But sometimes they receive help from the most unexpected sources, those that have ended lives themselves. Number 5. In June of 1964, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner traveled from Meridian to Longdale in Mississippi, where they were to meet fellow congregation members to discuss the burning of a church in the area. Chaney was involved in the civil rights movement. Schwerner was traveling to Longdale in order to join the movement, and Goodman had been involved in the Freedom Summer campaign, which aimed to register African Americans to vote in Mississippi. Just outside Philadelphia, however, they were stopped by police for speeding and escorted to the local jail, where they would be held for several hours. Upon their release, the three men got back into their car and set off once more, only to be pulled over again after leaving Neshoba County. They'd been followed by law enforcement officers, among others, who kidnapped them. They were then driven to an earthen dam where they were executed. 3 days later, their car would be discovered completely burned out, and a missing persons investigation was launched. Searches of the area were carried out by the FBI, local authorities, and 400 members of the U.S. Navy. Their bodies would be discovered 2 months later after it came to light that a certain clan had been involved, along with members of the Philadelphia Police Department. But this would not have been possible if not for the assistance of Gregory Scarpa, a previous hitman for the Colombo crime family. The FBI had strong suspicions that the three men had met an untimely end, but had no idea where they might be. They decided that Scarpa might be able to use heavy-handed interrogation techniques that agents were not allowed to use to find out information that may lead to the civil rights workers. Scarpa was furnished with a firearm and money to be used in acquiring information, and he put it to good use, kidnapping Lawrence Byrd, who was a Klansman. He was taken to the Army base, Camp Shelby, where Scarpa proceeded to assault him and threaten his life by forcing the pistol into his mouth. Byrd gave up the information, and the agents were able to recover the bodies of the three men. Scarpa would assist the FBI once more in 1966 in another case involving a Klan member, but an argument over this reward would see the FBI drop him as an informant thereafter. Number 4. A man named Henry, whose last name is not known to the public, lived with his grandmother in El Salvador due to his parents relocating to the United States. Here, the notorious gang, MS-13, recruited him into their ranks and changed his life forever. During his time with the gang, he would witness many acts of violence and traumatizing cruelty that would shape his formative years. In order to be fully inducted into the gang, he would need to end a life or have his own taken instead. Henry was reluctant, so a fellow gang member placed his finger over Henry's and pulled the trigger. Later, he would take another life, again coerced into doing so under the threat of being killed himself. He'd then had enough of life in a violent gang and moved to Long Island, where he lived with his mother. MS-13 had members here too, and Henry was reminded that he would be a member for life, or pay dearly, and so he was forced to rejoin. Still looking for a way to better his life, he wrote a note to his English teacher, hidden inside one of his assignments. A week later, he was called to the principal's office, where he spoke to a police officer, George Politis, who was based at the school. Politis was accompanied by Angel Rivera, a homicide detective who was working with the FBI's Long Island Gang Task Force. Politis told Henry that if he wanted to help them, he could tell Rivera all that he knew and that the FBI would ensure his safety by providing him with a new identity and moving him far away from Long Island. Henry and Rivera would exchange text messages in which he supplied the FBI with information regarding the gang, leading to the arrest of two brothers who'd been involved in several killings carried out by the gang members. Not long after, Henry's trust would be betrayed and he was detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and jailed alongside those individuals whom he'd informed the FBI about. He was then deported back to El Salvador and eventually fled to Europe with the help of his lawyer. Number 3. Joe Valachi is credited with popularizing the term Casa Nostra, which is the term used by the Sicilian Mafia to describe itself. He was also the first member of the Italian-American Mafia to publicly acknowledge its existence in 1963. He started his criminal career in a gang known as the Minutemen, so called for their ability to execute smash and grab burglaries and escape within a minute. He would later serve time in Sing Sing thanks to his crimes committed during this time period. In 1930, he was inducted into the American Mafia, where he became a soldier in the Reina family and eventually served as a bodyguard to the self-proclaimed boss of all bosses, known as Salvatore Maranzano. He would do this until Maranzano was assassinated 5 months later. Thereafter, he served as a soldier for the Genovese family, headed by Charles Lucky Luciano. In 1953, a hit was ordered on mobster Stephen France by mob boss Vito Genovese, who had ordered France to supervise his wife while he was hiding in Italy. He became suspicious that his wife might have been having an affair and tasked Valachi with France's demise. Valachi lured France to a restaurant in the Bronx where his life was ended. 6 years later, Valachi was convicted on narcotics violation charges and he became an informant. He claimed to be testifying as a public service and that he wanted to expose the mafia because they had ruined his life, but some speculate that he'd hoped to receive protection from the United States government as part of a plea bargain, seeing him avoid the death penalty after ending the life of an inmate during his previous stint in prison, fearing that the man may have been ordered to kill him. He would later learn that he'd mistaken the man for someone else. Thanks to his testimony, law enforcement was able to glean a detailed and accurate insight into the mafia's dealings and operations, leading to the solution of numerous unsolved cases involving organized crime syndicates. Number 2. William Pifer was a well-known member of the Hells Angels Motorbike Club. On January 15, 1971, he was attending a business meeting at the club's Richmond chapter, with a party following the meeting. The meeting was held at a clubhouse in El Sobrante and was attended by the club president Richard Barker, Junior Carter, Rollin Crane, Chester Green, Tom Shull, Charlie Baker, and other club members. Upon concluding the meeting, the party began with plenty of alcohol and narcotics making the rounds. At some point, Shull and Baker were instructed to buy more beer and whiskey, and Barker and Green decided to drug the drinks left behind by the two men. At around 6 a.m., Shull started to feel the effects of the drugs, becoming hysterical and paranoid. This prompted the others to play mind games with him, further exasperating his reaction to the narcotics. Shull became so violent that he had to be restrained, and Barker phoned another club member for some tablets that may calm him down. Numerous attempts were made to force Shull to drink the tablets, but he refused, spitting them out. Over the next 45 minutes, attempts were made to knock him unconscious, but to no avail. Barker then directed other members to tie Shull up and take him into one of the bedrooms. Just after 7:45 a.m., Pifer checked on Shull only to realize that he'd passed away. Barker confirmed this after checking for himself. Realizing that Baker was to be a witness to the crime, Barker instructed that he be done away with as well. His orders were carried out and the rest of the members proceeded to clean up any evidence that was left behind. On the following Monday, the two bodies were taken to a ranch where Crane, Pifer, Carter, and Green proceeded to bury the two men, with Barker keeping watch. In September of 1972, Pifer met with a man named Frank Tisanero from the Pittsburgh Police Department and explained that he'd been diagnosed with throat cancer and only had about 6 months to live. Upon receiving his diagnosis, he decided that he wanted to live the rest of his life on the street and would require complete immunity in exchange for information on the activities that took place on the ranch. By turning into a state witness, he was not only able to avoid a murder charge, but lived the last of his days as a free man. Number 1. One of the most notorious serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy, was sentenced to death in the 1970s for killing at least 36 women. He was an exceptionally intelligent man with an IQ testing at 136, earning a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Washington. He would ultimately be executed for his crimes on January 24, 1989 by electrocution, but not before helping authorities solve a case involving another serial killer, Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer. Ridgway would frequent truck stops where he would pick up his victims and, after ending their lives, leave their bodies in wooded areas around the Green River, thereby earning his nickname. He would also make sure to leave cigarette butts and chewing gum at the crime scene in order to throw authorities off, often moving his victims from one location to another in order to create a false trail. To aid in the search for the killer, King County Sheriff's Office created the Green River Task Force, which included Robert Keppel and David Reichert, who would interview criminologists and psychologists in order to get a better understanding of the killer's motives. Then, in 1984, they decided to interview Ted Bundy. Bundy had been in jail for 6 years by this point, and they felt that he had a unique perspective on the case, being a serial killer himself. Keppel and Reichert would regularly interview Bundy, gaining valuable psychological insights into the thinking of Ridgway. During one of the interviews, Bundy suggested that the killer would most likely be prone to returning to the sites where his victims had been left, and suggested that they keep watch on any newly discovered sites and await the man's return, among other suggestions. Police were able to use Bundy's theories to collect samples and other evidence that helped them obtain an arrest warrant. Thanks to DNA evidence that was collected from the crime scenes, Ridgway was finally linked to the murders 20 years after committing his crimes, and he was suspected of ending the lives of 4 women. Spray paint was found at some of the crime scenes and was also later found to be the same type that Ridgway used at work during the times of his crime spree, linking him to further murders. Ridgway was charged with 49 counts of murder, and he confessed to a further 23. He would eventually agree to provide police with locations of his victims, and in exchange would receive life in prison instead of the death penalty. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.